All right, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling something a lot of you have asked about how to actually think in English.
Not just knowing the words, but making it like your brain's automatic setting.
Exactly. And we're going beyond those surface level tips,
We're getting into the nitty-gritty, the how to rewire your thinking.
all based on a conversation between Sara and John from How to Think in English. Really insightful stuff.
Yeah, and some surprisingly simple strategies that pack a punch. We'll even get to the weird world of sticky notes later.
Oh yeah, that one's a doozy. But first, John really emphasizes starting small. But don't mistake that for being easy.
Right, he's talking about naming everyday objects around you, like chair, window, coffee mug. Sounds basic, but there's a bigger reason.
It's like you're training your brain to see everything through an English lens first.
Instead of thinking cup, then translating, the English word just pops up automatically.
And eventually it's the only word that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Like you don't even consider the translation anymore.
Boom, English mode activated. And John takes it a step further. Instead of just cup, you think, this is my favorite cup.
Oh, I like that. So you're building from single words to actually using them in sentences.
Effortlessly. Imagine doing this while you're commuting, cooking, just living life.
Suddenly, English isn't something you study, it's how you experience the world.
Now, we've all hit that wall where you're trying to think in English and the word just disappears. Poof.
Ugh, the worst. But John has a tip for when that happens.
He says to describe the object or concept, even if it's clumsy, like can't remember stove, think the hot thing I cook on.
Yeah, it's about working with what you've got.
Forces your brain to get creative, problem-solve in English. That's more valuable than any vocab list.
I'm curious, have you ever used this describing thing? I can see it being a lifesaver when you're traveling.
Yeah, it's surprising how well it works. Plus, it gets you comfy with paraphrasing, which is key for any language.
All right, get ready for this next one. It's kind of out there. John recommends switching your phone and social media to English.
I know, sounds almost too simple. But think about how much time we're on our phones.
It's like constant, low-key exposure to English without even trying.
Like immersion by accident. For everyone listening, could you commit to this for a week? What do you think would happen?
It's about changing those deep habits, not just cramming info. Small, consistent stuff can really make a difference.
Right, it's not magic, it's rewiring. Now, this is great for daily stuff, but what about when you're wrestling with big, complex thoughts?
Like, how do you think in English when you're trying to solve a problem or process something emotional?
John's solution: journaling. Might sound old school, but it's powerful for practicing without the pressure of speaking perfectly.
He's all about clarity over trying to sound fancy. Like, instead of, I am overwhelmed with joy, you might write, I am very happy.
The point is getting those thoughts out in English, not writing a novel.
It's like how we learn our first language. Start simple, complexity comes later.
Exactly. So if those big ideas are tripping you up, try a simple journal entry about your day or something you're excited about.
It's all about practice, finding what clicks for you. But what about when we actually have to speak English? How do we break that translate in our heads habit?
This is where it gets really interesting. John recommends giving yourself a mental pause before answering someone.
So don't feel like you have to jump in instantly.
Take a second to form your thought in English, then speak. It's like letting your brain catch up and switch gears.
Oh, I've totally blurted out nonsense before because I was translating too fast.
We've all been there, that deer in the headlights feeling. This pause helps avoid that awkwardness.
Speaking of natural, John brings up shadowing. Listening to podcasts or videos and repeating almost at the same time.
A lot of people think it's just for pronunciation, but it's way more. You're absorbing the rhythm, the way sentences flow naturally.
It's like training your brain and your mouth to work together in English. Try it with a 1-minute clip tonight, see what happens.
Now let's tackle that translation habit head on. It's a trap. John calls his technique mental role-playing.
This is where you imagine yourself in different situations, ordering food, asking directions.
And you practice those conversations in your head, all in English. Sounds kind of silly, but...
It's like athletes visualizing before a game. Your brain gets a sneak peek.
So, if you're planning a trip, picture checking into the hotel, ordering food, all in English. The more you practice, the more confident you'll feel.
All right, buckle up for this one. Ready for some sneaky daily hacks? John says, label everyday objects around your house with sticky notes.
I know, sticky notes. But here's the thing. Picture your fridge, your desk, covered in words like refrigerator, computer.
It's like a visual dictionary explosion. But there's a method to this madness.
This is using something called spaced repetition, powerful memory technique.
So, seeing these words all day long, you're basically learning without even trying. Passive learning on steroids.
And you can customize it. If you're a foodie, label everything in your kitchen. Tech geek. Label all your gadgets.
It's making English part of your environment, not just something you study for an hour.
And it goes beyond sticky notes. John suggests setting phone reminders in English, thinking in English while grocery shopping.
Find those little moments throughout the day to switch your brain into English mode.
The key is finding what works for you and making it a habit. Not a one-time thing, but something that sticks.
Okay, let's talk subtitles. Are they helping or hurting our progress?
Tricky one. John's approach is gradual weaning. Start with subtitles in your native language, then switch to English ones.
Eventually, challenge yourself to go without, but don't rush it.
It's like how babies learn. Immersion, not word-for-word translation. Find a show you love, maybe a comedy, and experiment.
Speaking of challenges, John's big on reading in English, even if it's just a bit each day, but he adds a twist.
As you read, try to picture everything in your mind. The scenes, the characters, but all in English.
It's like creating a movie in your head. Makes the language way more vivid, less abstract.
Especially if you're a visual learner. Reading sci-fi, picture those crazy worlds, historical fiction, imagine yourself there.
All right, tech time. John recommends apps like Duolingo, Memrise, HelloTalk, great for vocab, actually talking to people.
But here's a hack your voice assistant. You're already using it for everything else. Why not practice English too?
I love that. Ask it to tell you a joke, give you the news, whatever. What's the weirdest thing you could ask it today? Have fun with it.
And speaking of fun, this leads to John's final point, and it's a big one. Embrace those mistakes.
Don't let the fear of messing up hold you back. It's proof you're actually learning.
This is about the growth mindset. Even the most fluent speakers were beginners once. They messed up, we mess up, it's all good.
It's celebrating those little wins, those moments when you successfully think or speak in English. You're rewiring your brain. That's huge.
And remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Ups and downs, frustration, excitement, it's all part of the journey.
The key is to keep practicing, keep being curious, and most importantly, enjoy the ride.
Exactly. Make it fun, and the results will follow. You know, it's amazing how these little changes like your phone settings can make such a big difference in how you think.
It's wild, right? You're basically surrounded by English even when you're not studying.
Yeah.
Kind of like how we learned our first language.
Exactly. Tapping into that natural learning. And John's sticky note idea, quirky as it sounds, really plays into that constant exposure.
I'll admit, I was skeptical about the sticky notes at first.
Yeah, it sounds a bit out there.
But the more we talk about it, the more it makes sense. It's like making your own visual dictionary of your world.
Exactly. It's not just memorizing random words, it's connecting them to your actual life.
And you mentioned something called spaced repetition.
Oh, yeah, that's the science behind it. It's a learning technique where you review stuff at longer and longer intervals.
So by seeing those sticky notes throughout the day.
You're reminding your brain about those words at just the right time to really lock them in.
So it's not just the visual, it's the timing that matters.
Exactly. And the best part, it's practically effortless. You're learning passively as you go about your day.
I can see how this would be great for busy people who can't always find time to study.
It's like sneaking in extra study sessions without even trying. And remember, you don't have to stick to just objects. Get creative.
Like what?
Write out phrases, quotes, song lyrics, anything to keep your brain engaged with English in a fun way.
And make it personal. If you love cooking, label everything in your kitchen. Fitness buff. Label your workout gear.
It's all about making those connections to your world. The more relevant, the better.
Okay, so we've covered the analog stuff, but what about us techies? Any digital tools that can help us think in English?
Oh, tons. John mentions Duolingo, Memrise, and HelloTalk. Have you tried any of those?
I've heard good things about Duolingo. It's supposed to be really fun and game-like.
Yeah, it's great for beginners and even more advanced learners. The bite-sized lessons and interactive stuff make it really engaging.
What about Memrise? I know they use something called mnemonics.
Oh yeah, mnemonics are basically memory tricks. Memrise uses them to create funny images and stories that help you remember words.
So instead of just memorizing a word, you're creating a whole little story around it.
Exactly. It makes it way more memorable. And for those who want to practice speaking, HelloTalk connects you with native speakers.
Wow, so you can actually have conversations and get feedback on your pronunciation and everything.
It's like having a language exchange partner in your pocket.
Yeah.
Now, here's a tech tool you might not have thought of your voice assistant.
Wait, like Siri or Google Assistant?
Yep. We use them for everything else. Why not English practice? You can talk to it, get instant feedback on your pronunciation.
It's like having a 247 English tutor, and it's a safe space to practice without feeling judged.
Exactly. Start with simple commands, then ask it questions, maybe even try dictating messages in English.
It's all about finding those creative ways to weave English into your daily life.
Couldn't agree more. Now, speaking of weaving English in, let's talk about reading. John's a big advocate for reading in English, even a little bit every day.
But he also suggests adding this really interesting twist.
As you read, visualize. Imagine the characters, the setting, the action, all in your mind in English.
It's like making a movie in your head as you read. Makes the language more real, less abstract.
Especially for visual learners.
Hmm.
Reading fantasy. Picture those magical creatures, historical fiction. Imagine yourself walking those streets.
It's bringing the language to life, making it more than just words on a page.
Now, you might be thinking, this is great, but where do I even start?
Right, it can feel overwhelming.
John's advice, start small, build momentum gradually. Don't try to do everything at once.
Pick one or two techniques that resonate with you and make them a part of your daily routine.
And remember, it's a journey, not a race. There will be days when you feel super motivated and days when you just want to give up.
The key is to be kind to yourself, celebrate your wins, and focus on the long game.
And don't be afraid to experiment. See what works best for you and make it your own. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that can be pretty nerve-wracking, actually speaking English. It's one thing to think it in your head, but actually saying it out loud.
It's a whole different ballgame. It can be scary, especially when you're starting out.
For sure. We worry about making mistakes, sounding weird, not being understood. But John has some good tips for overcoming that fear.
Like what?
Start small. Don't expect to have deep conversations right away. Begin with greetings, introductions, simple questions.
Build up that confidence gradually.
Like learning any skill. You wouldn't run a marathon before you could walk, right?
True. Baby steps, then build up to the big stuff.
And remember, mistakes are going to happen. It's inevitable, and that's okay. It's how we learn.
I love that reminder. It's so easy to get stuck on wanting to be perfect.
But perfect doesn't exist. It's the journey, the stumbles that make it all worthwhile.
Speaking of journeys, remember that technique we talk about? Shadowing? Turns out it's not just for listening.
Oh yeah, shadowing is amazing for speaking too. By copying native speakers, you're training your brain and your mouth to work together.
You're basically building muscle memory for English.
Exactly. And you can do it anywhere, anytime. Stick on your headphones, pick a podcast or video you like, and start repeating.
Now, for those who are ready to level up their speaking practice, John has this technique he calls mental role-playing.
Oh, this is fun. It's basically imagining yourself in different situations, ordering food, asking for directions.
And you have those conversations in your head, all in English.
It preps your brain for real-life scenarios, like mental rehearsal.
If you're planning a trip, picture yourself checking into the hotel, asking for recommendations all in English.
The more you practice those mental conversations, the more natural it will feel when you actually have to do it.
Okay, this one's for the visual learners out there. John suggests labeling things around your house with sticky notes.
But with a twist. Instead of just writing the word, draw a little picture next to it.
It's like creating your own visual dictionary.
Right. Helps those who struggle with abstract words or learn better with pictures.
Plus, by using both words and images, you're making stronger connections in your brain, making it easier to remember.
This could even be a fun activity to do with kids who are learning English. Makes it more interactive.
Speaking of challenges, let's talk about the habit of translating in our heads. It's like having a constant mental translator running.
It's exhausting. John suggests focusing on chunks of meaning instead of individual words.
So instead of word-for-word translation, try to grasp the whole idea and then express it in English.
It takes practice, but it gets easier. You're shifting from the mechanics of translation to the flow of ideas.
And immerse yourself in English as much as possible. Movies, music, conversations. The more exposure, the better.
It's like creating an English-speaking world in your mind.
And remember, it's a process. Don't get discouraged if you find yourself slipping back into the translation habit. Just gently redirect yourself and keep practicing.
Now let's talk grammar. It's a big debate. Do we need to master it, or will fluency come naturally?
John seems to believe in finding a balance.
Yeah, he sees grammar as a tool. It helps you understand how the language works, but it shouldn't be a barrier to communication.
So it's not about being a grammar expert. It's about using it to actually communicate.
Exactly. Pay attention to how native speakers use grammar in real life and try to do the same.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're part of the learning process.
Absolutely. Experiment, Try different things, and if you're not sure, ask for help. There are no dumb questions.
All right, let's move on to vocabulary. Building a strong vocabulary is key, but it can feel overwhelming.
John's advice: focus on words that are relevant to your life and interests. Don't waste time on words you'll never use.
Make it meaningful. If you love to cook, learn cooking terms. Tech enthusiast, learn tech vocabulary.
And don't just learn words in isolation. Learn them in sentences, in context.
It helps you understand how they're actually used in the real world. And remember, repetition, repetition, repetition.
Flashcards, word lists, apps. Use whatever works for you to keep those words fresh in your mind.
Speaking of keeping things fresh, let's talk reading again. John's a big fan, but he has some specific tips for maximizing it.
He suggests starting with material that's a bit easier than your current level. It keeps it enjoyable, less frustrating.
And as you read, pay attention to new words. Don't just skip over them.
Look them up, understand their meaning, and try to use them in your own speaking and writing.
It's like turning your reading into a personalized vocabulary lesson.
And don't be afraid to reread things that are interesting or challenging. Repetition helps solidify those new words and concepts.
And read actively. Don't just scan the words. Ask questions, make predictions, connect it to your own life.
It deepens your understanding of the language and makes it more engaging.
All right, let's move on to listening comprehension. It's crucial for communication, but it can be tough.
Especially with different accents and speeds of speech. John's advice: start with materials that match your level.
Don't jump into advanced stuff right away. Simple conversations, short videos, podcasts for learners. Those are your friends.
And don't be afraid to use subtitles or transcripts to help you follow along, especially in the beginning.
Focus on the main idea, not every single word.
And if you need clarification, just ask. It's okay to say, "Can you repeat that?" Or, "Can you explain what you mean?"
And repetition is key here too. Listen to the same thing multiple times. You'll pick up new things each time.
And remember shadowing. Turns out, it's great for listening comprehension too.
By repeating after native speakers, you're training your brain to process the sounds of the language more efficiently.
You're tuning into those subtle details of pronunciation and rhythm, which helps you understand better.
Okay, let's address the elephant in the room, the fear of making mistakes.
It's something so many learners struggle with. It can be paralyzing.
It's like a mental block that keeps us from speaking up and practicing.
John's advice: shift your mindset from perfectionism to growth.
It's about seeing mistakes as opportunities, not failures.
Everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers. It's normal.
It's about seeing them as feedback. Each mistake helps us learn and identify areas to work on.
The more mistakes, the more we learn. It's like a muscle getting stronger with each workout.
This is such a liberating message. It's okay to mess up.
Now, let's talk about motivation. It's easy to get excited at first, but how do we stay motivated over time?
Especially when it gets tough. And trust me, it will get tough.
John suggests connecting your language learning goals to your personal values.
Why are you learning English? What do you want to achieve with it?
When you link it to something that really matters to you, it becomes more than just studying.
It becomes a part of your journey towards something bigger.
And celebrate your progress. Every new word, every conversation, every book you read, it's all a win.
It's acknowledging how far you've come, even when the road ahead feels long.
And remember, language learning is a lifelong journey. There's always more to learn, more to explore.
This deep dive into how to think in English has given us so much to think about. Techniques, strategies, mindset shifts.
And while we've covered a lot, the key takeaway is to find what works for you and make it a part of your life.
Create a language learning lifestyle that you enjoy and that fits your needs.
So as you go about your day-to-day, think about the things that resonated with you. What small steps can you take? How can you immerse yourself in English?
Even small actions, when done consistently, can lead to big results. Keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep believing in yourself.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. Imagine yourself a year from now confidently thinking and speaking in English.
What would that look like? What would you be doing? How would it feel?
We'll explore this further in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive. Before the break, we were picturing ourselves a year from now, fluent and confident in English. What does that actually look like, though?
It's so easy to get stuck in the day-to-day of learning, vocab drills and all that. But having that bigger vision, it's crucial.
It's like instead of just, I want to be fluent, you imagine yourself doing something specific in English.
Right. Leading a meeting at work, having a deep conversation with a friend, ordering food without breaking a sweat, the more vivid you make it.
The more real it feels, and that helps keep you going when things get tough. But vision's only part of it, right? We got to put in the work.
Absolutely. And John has some cool ideas about how to make that work feel less like work and more like just living.
He talks about creating a language learning lifestyle,
Yeah.
not just squeezing in study time, but making English part of your everyday flow.
We've touched on this already. The phone settings, the sticky notes, thinking in English while you're doing your thing.
But it's even bigger than that.
Mm.
It's about finding ways to engage with English that you actually enjoy, not just the shoulds.
Huge! If you love music, crank up those English language tunes. Movie buff. Watch them in English, the things you'd be doing anyway.
But you're doing them in a way that's boosting your English.
Sneaky, right. And don't forget about talking to people.
So important. Find a conversation group, an online buddy, even just chat with someone at the store. It all adds up. The more you surround yourself with English, the easier it becomes to think in it naturally. Immersion, even without traveling.
Now, we've gotten into the techniques, but John also talks about mindset. That's huge for success with anything, really.
He's all about that growth mindset, the belief that you can always improve no matter where you're starting from.
Yeah, it's seeing challenges as opportunities to learn, not as roadblocks. Believing in your ability to grow, even when you mess up.
You know, it's funny, when I think back to when I first started learning, those moments of frustration and self-doubt.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
But it's so important to remember that everyone goes through that. It's part of the process.
And those tough moments, they often lead to the biggest breakthroughs. You push through, and suddenly you realize how far you've come.
It's like climbing a mountain. It's going to be hard. There'll be times you want to quit, but the view from the top, worth it.
Okay, so we've got the techniques, the mindset. But what about motivation? How do we keep that fire burning over time?
Because let's be real, language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be dips, there will be plateaus.
John's advice: connect your English learning to your deeper whys. Why are you doing this in the first place?
Exactly. What are you hoping to achieve? When it's tied to something that really matters to you, the motivation sticks around.
It becomes more than just checking off a to-do list. And he also says, celebrate the small wins. Every new word, every conversation.
Acknowledge how far you've come, even if it feels small in the moment. It all adds up. And remember, this is a lifelong journey.
This deep dive into how to think in English has been packed with great stuff. So many techniques, so many mindset shifts.
But the biggest takeaway is this. Find what works for you and make it your own. Create a language learning life you enjoy.
So as you go about your day, think about what resonated with you today. What small changes can you make? What opportunities can you grab?
Even those tiny steps, when done consistently, they make a huge difference. Keep practicing, keep exploring, and most importantly,
Keep believing in yourself. You got this. This is just the start of your journey to thinking in English. We're excited to see where it takes you.
until next time, happy learning, everyone.
Thanks for watching this video from Simply English, an educational channel for all ages and all stages. If you're new to this channel and enjoyed this video, please subscribe and press the like button. If you have any suggestions, please mention them in the comments section. Take care, and goodbye.